Someone once said that only a paradox can light the way to the truth. It sounds dramatic until you feel one settle in the mind like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading, patterns shifting, everything you thought was secure beginning to move. Not every question was built for an answer. Some exist to rattle certainty, to pull at the edge seams of what we call reality. These aren't word games. They're the raw collisions between tidy logic and the merciless bigness of the universe. Problems that have survived generation after generation of cleverness without surrendering. Tonight isn't a list of curiosities. It's a quiet walk into the rooms where our best ideas come apart. We'll pass through places where time seems to fold back on itself and close without ever opening. We'll drift across a galaxy that should be crowded and bright with civilizations, yet presents us with unbroken dark. We'll pause at the threshold where simply looking at a thing changes what that thing is. We'll meet a cat that's both alive and dead, billiard balls that collide with themselves, black holes that seem to drain the ink out of history. Each idea starts out small, almost gentle. Follow it carefully to the end, and something important breaks, and that's where the real story begins. If you find a certain fragile beauty in not knowing, if you don't mind looking into the unknown a little too long, if the night outside your window sometimes feels like a question, then you're exactly where you ought to be. Let your shoulders drop. Breathe a little slower. There's no hurry. The universe will still be there after each breath. Space looks calm from a distance, but it hides a question that is anything but peaceful. We live inside a galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars, most of them older than our sun. We've learned, slowly at first and then all at once, that many of those stars host planets, and that a surprising number of those worlds might resemble ours in the ways that matter. Warmth enough for liquid water, stability enough for chemistry to keep its promises, long ages for life to try, fail, and try again. By all accounts, there has been time. By all accounts, there have been chances. So, where is everyone? We have been listening, patiently, carefully. Giant radio dishes have combed the sky for decades, hoping for a whisper with an artificial edge, something that says, with certainty, someone else has been here. Yet the signal we keep receiving is silence. Not a poetic silence, not the hush you get in libraries and winter fields, but the kind of continuous silence that feels like a fact. It's as though we are calling into a canyon and nothing answers, not because the far wall is empty necessarily, but because perhaps something else is going on. Statistically, loneliness doesn't add up. Even if you are cautious with every assumption about how often stars form planets, about how often those planets allow life, about how many biological experiments stumble into intelligence, you still end up with a galaxy that ought to host hundreds, perhaps thousands of technological societies, and yet we have no confirmed signals, no undeniable artifacts, no unmistakable beacons, just starlight, just distance. You don't need a name to feel the contradiction, though it has one. You only need a window at night and a few minutes without your phone. It settles in, this question, in the quiet part of the evening. Why does a sky so wide, so old, so full of time remain so empty of voices? We've always liked to believe that life naturally invents tools, that intelligence naturally reaches outward, that progress has a kind of momentum. Perhaps those are stories we tell because they are comforting. Perhaps civilizations rise and fall too quickly to overlap. Perhaps the bright spark of technology is brief, crushed under the weight of its own power before it learns how to use it. Perhaps they are present, right now, and simply watching, having chosen silence where we choose noise. There is another possibility, heavier than the rest. Perhaps we are the first here, the first to step into this part of the dark water with a lamp, the first to build a radio and ask the sky a question. That idea changes the temperature of the night. It makes humanity feel delicate, not triumphant. It suggests that we aren't just searching for others, we're carrying something rare, and we might be the only ones able to carry it for a very long time. A chance to speak where no one has ever spoken. A responsibility to avoid vanishing before we are heard. If that thought makes the stars feel further away, or the silence feel denser, if it leaves you a little more awake than you meant to be, let it. You're not alone in the feeling. And if floating through these midnight puzzles is your kind of journey, subscribe and like Space Historian so you don't lose the thread of this story when the morning calls you back. Not long ago, Earth was the only known world with the right ingredients. Our little blue circle around an ordinary star. Fragile, singular, maybe even unique. That illusion shattered in a generation. With modern telescopes and patient surveys, we've discovered that the galaxy is overflowing with planets. Hundreds of billions. Among them, Earth-like worlds are not rare. They are common. Kepler's patient stare confirmed what many suspected. Scattered across the Milky Way, there may be hundreds of millions of rocky planets orbiting sun-like stars within the so-called habitable zone. Not a handful, hundreds of millions. Worlds with oceans, worlds with steady light, worlds with ages upon ages for chemistry to become biology, and for biology on at least a few brave, lucky attempts to dream itself into consciousness. If even a tiny fraction of those worlds ever discovered language and tools, even if only a sliver of that sliver built transmitters and beacons, you might expect the night to be stitched with signals. Faint but present. Patterns in the static. Signs that someone else stepped onto the stage and tried to speak. Yet the quiet continues. The maths don't merely stretch the mind, they break your sense of scale. Space isn't just big, it's old. Many stars are billions of years older than our sun. That's room for countless beginnings. If success ever happened once, just once, in a way that persisted, why do we see nothing? It's like walking into a vast cathedral, built over eons, and finding your footsteps the only sound. The air should be thick with echoes. Instead, only your breath. The more we learn about how many worlds there are, the more unnatural the emptiness feels. There are explanations, of course. There are always explanations. Perhaps intelligence struggles to survive itself. Perhaps technological windows are brief. Perhaps civilizations hide from one another by choice. Yet each explanation breeds more questions. Why so thoroughly quiet? Why no ruins drifting between stars? No constructs silhouetted against nebulae? No galactic vandalism etched into starlight? Why do we feel late to a party that, by every number we trust, should have begun before we were even dust? Some problems don't arise from not knowing enough. They arise from trying to be too honest with what we do know. In 1961, an astronomer tried to turn this particular ache into a formula, not to solve it, but to lay out the moving parts so that we could think straight. How many stars form each year? How many of those stars have planets? How many of these worlds can host life? Of those, how many actually do? How often does life climb the long ladder to intelligence? How often does intelligence build something loud enough to be noticed across interstellar distances? And perhaps the most somber variable of all, how long does such a civilization endure? Multiply those pieces and you get a number, a living guess at how many voices should be broadcasting right now in our part of the galaxy. Here's the stitched part of the quilt that never lies flat. No matter how careful, how conservative, the product rarely comes out to zero. The calculation suggests we should be soaking in whispers. Radio waves should lap at us like tide water. Pulses, patterns, artificial echoes. But we receive an ocean of nothing. The silence presses back. So we revisit the formula and try to bend it until it matches the world. Perhaps we have been far too generous. Perhaps life doesn't start easily. Perhaps intelligence is frighteningly rare. Perhaps technology is rarer still. Or perhaps the last term, the lifespan of a civilization, is the fulcrum on which the whole thing tips. If societies that can speak to the stars tend not to last long, then the galaxy can host countless fires that never overlap. It's a neat way to tidy the contradiction. A neatness that doesn't feel much like comfort. There are, broadly, two narratives that can explain a quiet sky. One is frightening. The other, depending on your heart, might be worse. The first narrative imagines a galaxy that isn't empty at all, but watchful. Civilizations spread thinly but widely. Old minds looking outward, each one careful, each one hiding, not out of superstition, but because they learned a hard lesson, that revealing your position in a cosmos of unknowns is dangerous. In this picture, the universe is a dark forest. Every species is a hunter. Every world is a temporary shelter. The safest policy is silence. When something makes a sound, it disappears. This would explain the hush without invoking cosmic solitude. The others are present, alert, listening, refraining from the one choice we cannot seem to resist. They are considering us. Are we wise enough to keep quiet, or naive enough to shout? It's not a cheerful picture, but it fits the evidence rather too well. No greetings, no messengers, no clumsy loud neighbours, just stars, all carefully pretending to be only stars. The second narrative is the empty ocean. The sea is vast and calm because nothing else sails it. Not because something predatory prowls the deeps. Not because it's dangerous to sing. Because there is no one to hear. We may be the first to build boats. We may be the only ones who ever will. Both stories make sense of the quiet. Both can be true and unkind at the same time. If the forest is real, we're being watched. If the ocean is real, we are it, the only witness, the only storyteller, the species that, if it fails, will leave behind no one to remember that there was ever a question to be asked. We keep listening. We keep thinking. Are we in a forest we don't yet understand? Or sailing alone across water so open that sound evaporates? If either image leaves a chill at the base of your neck, rest there for a moment. The shiver is not a warning. It's a mark that you've allowed the scale of things to enter. We used to imagine ourselves central. Then we learned the Earth circles the Sun. Then we learned the Sun is one among billions. Then we learned our galaxy is one among trillions. And still we assumed we could not be alone. But the ongoing hush is changing that assumption. It isn't merely that we haven't found intelligent life, it's that the reasons we give for why we should have found it grow stronger year by year. More habitable planets, more time, better tools, more chances, yet the universe remains wordlessly mute. Not a murmur, not a murky, almost signal, mute. There is a peculiar emotion that arrives with that understanding. It isn't quite fear, and it isn't the clean astonishment we call wonder. It's akin to loneliness, cosmic loneliness, that comes from looking at all this and thinking, perhaps no one else is watching with us. But silence does not always mean absence. It can also mean fragility. If life is rare, then we are custodians of something irreplaceable. If intelligence blooms but seldom endures, then we are a flicker in a cold wind. Beautiful, brief, and far too easy to snuff out. If we are truly the first, then we are not just observers. We are the experiment. The first voice, the first witness. That changes the questions. We are no longer simply asking, where is everyone? We must also ask, what story do we want to leave behind? What record, what trace, what kindnesses and catastrophes do we send forward for others, if others ever come to find? Maybe that is why the silence feels so heavy. It is a mirror. We aim a dish at the sky and hear ourselves reflected back. Warnings, opportunities, obligations. If the thought that we might be the only conscious eyes pointed outwards makes you feel smaller and more awake at once, that's appropriate. In a galaxy that should be noisy, quiet might be telling us the loudest truth of all. Time, by contrast, pretends to be simple. It clicks forward. Cause, then effect. Morning after night, winter after autumn. We build our lives around the arrow, sure that it flies straight, but there is a fracture under the rhythm, a possibility that time is not only a line, but a loop. Imagine not a metaphor, but a literal loop in time. You take something from the future into the past, and that very something is what causes itself to exist. No first spark, no beginning, just the loop, a story that tells itself in a circle. This is one of physics' most unsettling contradictions, not because it defies engineering, but because it leans hard against the grammar of existence. Picture this. You walk into a small bookshop and buy a copy of *Hamlet*. Years pass. For reasons you can barely explain, you build a machine that lets you step backwards along your own timeline. You return to London in Shakespeare's century. You hand him the book. He reads it, adores it, signs his name to it, and sends it into the world. Centuries later, that same book sits on the shelf of the shop where you first found it. Who wrote the play? It didn't come from nowhere. There it is, weighty and inked, but it also didn't come from anywhere. There is no author behind the words, not in the way we understand authorship. There is a name for this sort of loop, but names don't fix the sensation in the stomach. It's a cycle in which cause and effect fold onto one another until the two cannot be told apart. Information, meaningful, specific, structured, exists in time without ever being created. The book sits there because the loop sustains it. You can trace the pages through centuries, but you will never find a first pen stroke. It sounds like a writer's daydream, a clever paradox from a thin book of puzzles. But general relativity, the mathematical scaffolding that describes gravity as curves in space-time, does not forbid it. Under certain conditions, Einstein's equations permit closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that circle back to their own starting points. Travel them, and you could meet your past self. Bring an object along. Whisper a secret backwards. If the universe allows such paths, the universe allows loops like the bookshop story. And if it allows loops like that, then originality becomes slippery. Inventions, discoveries, even people could exist within cycles where no clean origin can be pointed to. Reality would be less a long straight road and more like a spiral staircase, always climbing, always turning, and every so often passing the same window again, the same book in the same hand. If this makes time feel less like a clock and more like a beautifully decorated trap, that's because your mind is refusing to do something it was never built to do. Accept a world where beginnings are illusions. The deeper we walk into this quiet wing of physics, the more time folds, the more starts become middles, the more endings breathe backwards into causes. Now return to the shop. You hand Shakespeare the book. He reads, memorizes, publishes. *Hamlet*. Asterisk becomes a masterpiece. It passes from hand to hand, classroom to classroom, stage to stage. Centuries unwind and rewind. You walk back into the shop and pick up the same copy. You carry it to the past. The loop closes. No one wrote it. That is the core of the problem, not merely an object adrift without origin, but information meaning itself, sustaining its own existence without ever being created. There was no moment of insight, no quill lifted with intention, no mind that first built those lines from silence. The story exists because it always has, because the loop never fails, because it never didn't. Something cracks when you let that in. So much of our world rests on a simple rule. Everything has a source. Thoughts have thinkers. Machines have inventors. Music comes from composers. Yet inside this kind of loop, the origin dissolves and the thing itself endures. The source vanishes. The pattern remains. It makes you wonder what else could live this way. A theorem that no one truly derived. A machine plan with no first draft. A piece of knowledge that appears fully formed in a mind is handed backwards to an earlier century and then returns in the future unchanged, like a song that has no composer, playing on without ever beginning. Physics doesn't dismiss the possibility. Einstein's relativity doesn't forbid circles in time. In fact, certain solutions, especially those involving extreme gravity or speculative bridges like wormholes, open the door to places where past and future touch. Through that doorway, you can imagine self-created objects, self-starting events, cause and effect smoothing into one continuous ribbon. There is a darker door too. What if we live inside one of those loops? What if an idea we call ours, a device that defines our age, a belief that shapes how we move through the world, did not originate here, or now, or with us? What if we are carrying a torch handed to us by a future that knew our steps? If time permits these closed paths, then invention can become recollection, and history begins to resemble rehearsal. If that nudges you to question where your present thoughts truly came from, breathe slowly, settle deeper into the pillow, and somewhere between now and the next breath, subscribe and tap like for Space Historian, so you won't drift away from the thread when the night grows quiet again. We might not be marching forward at all. We might be orbiting something we have already seen. Perhaps there are objects, ideas, and melodies that exist precisely because they never didn't. We often think of time as paper, flat, neat, obedient. You draw a line from left to right, past to present to future, and it feels sensible. But what if the paper creases? What if 2 points that should be years apart suddenly touch? That is the feeling of a closed loop in time. An object does not merely endure along the line, it slips the line entirely and bends it, joining end to beginning. Yesterday and tomorrow become neighbours across a fold. Abstract? Perhaps. But some exact solutions to Einstein's equations whisper that such folds could be possible, near rapidly spinning black holes, under conditions so intense that space and time twine tighter than rope, or across hypothetical tunnels that pin distant regions together. In those theatres, time doesn't have to drift one way. It can curl, it can circle, it can, in theory, be folded like origami. When the crease is made, strangeness begins to feel tidy. Imagine placing a violin into a machine and sending it backward. A musician in the past discovers the instrument, writes with it, performs with it, and the music becomes beloved. The violin is kept safe, handed down, displayed, preserved, until one day you find it again and, almost absent-mindedly, send it back. No first luthier, no first chiselled curve. The varnish glows, but there was no original brush, only the loop, a shape that closes perfectly onto itself. These loops can be self-consistent, neat in the way a circle is neat. They do not smash the sequence of events, they preserve it. So long as the steps don't contradict themselves, the loop quietly persists. Nothing cries out for a cause because, in a way that can make your temples ache, the cause is the effect. The explanation is the loop, but the elegance hides a deeper disquiet. If time can crease like this, what exactly is memory? What do we mean by invention? What is the difference, if any, between discovering a thing and receiving it from a future you haven't yet reached? Perhaps this isn't fantasy. Perhaps some of what you believe, some of what you have read or built or trusted, isn't original in the way your mind assumes. Perhaps you are one fold on the page, one soft ridge in the map, and the idea was already on its journey back to you. It shifts how progress looks in the night. Maybe we don't build ideas so much as we ferry them. Perhaps we aren't inventors but couriers, carrying parcels with labels none of us can read. And if time can fold like this, how many creases are under our feet that we never notice? If that thought made you glance at your own stream of thinking from a slightly different angle, let the breath go out in a long, even line. What appears to be a straight road may be the outer edge of a spiral. Sometimes time doesn't stride forward. Sometimes it turns a corner and places something in your hands that it hasn't made yet. Some systems collapse when there's too much feedback. Stand too close to a speaker while holding a microphone and you'll hear it, the rising whine, the squeal of a loop forming. Sound enters, grows, re-enters, grows again until the whole apparatus shakes under its own echo. Now imagine reality doing something similar. In certain models, events can feed themselves, not because a thing is merely repeated, but because an effect becomes its own cause. The future reaches back, pours into the past, and together they create the present. Not a tale told front to back, but a circuit humming within itself. Picture a physicist who receives the finished form of a revolutionary equation from her future self. She studies, understands, publishes, and years later becomes the one who sends it backwards. The knowledge is real. The mathematics are useful. But who wrote the first line? The loop sustains itself. No contradictions, no conflict with the broader story, just a calm recursive chain, a paradox that holds steady. You can walk around it and never find a seam. This isn't merely a bedtime fancy. In quantum mechanics, the field where the smallest things refuse to behave like tiny marbles, some researchers have asked whether information always flows neatly from past to present. What if the past, present, and future can become entangled, each part leaning on the others? In certain proposed experiments and interpretations, outcomes appear to depend not only on how you start the process, but on what you decide to measure later. The future choice seems to slide its hand backwards into the machinery. The system only becomes what it is after it is observed, and sometimes the observation that will be made can shape which possibilities survive long enough to be seen. It's called post-selection in some contexts, and it puts pressure on the simple story we tell about cause and effect. In these pictures, loops aren't accidents, they are constraints. Nature may permit only those histories that agree with themselves from end to end. Narratives that knot themselves into contradictions are discarded. Universes whose stories don't fit never stabilize. Only the self-consistent survive. If that's the rule, then reality is constantly editing its own script. You are not only experiencing the world forward, you may be part of a loop that quietly checks whether your memories, your choices, even your thoughts fit the whole. If they don't, that version of events never settles. That version of you never becomes actual. What remains is stranger than an arrow of time. It is a cosmos guided by feedback, always echoing, always testing, always curving back to compare today with the tomorrow that must be. No clean beginnings, no final cause, just a pattern that sustains itself. If that notion turns the arrow of time into a circle in your mind, let your eyes soften. The room is still there. So are you. What we call reality might be less a story and more a closed equation working to solve itself, and perhaps we are here to complete one of its loops by thinking the very thoughts we're meant to think. We like to believe the past is bedrock, first, foundational, unmoved. It came before and pushed the present into being. But in some readings of quantum theory, and in certain ways of sketching space-time, the past may be more than a beginning. It may be an outcome. The present doesn't only sprout from what came before, it can also be limited by what must come after. Consider a particle, a tiny sliver of the world that can occupy many states at once. Before you measure it, its description is fuzzy, smeared across possibilities. Then you measure, and the fuzz sharpens into one result. Here's the twist. In specific experimental designs and interpretations, the thing you decide to do later can seem to influence what was true earlier. The future measurement reaches back and helps decide the history the particle had. It is as though the particle were waiting not simply to be noticed, but to learn what kind of future it would have to fit. Then it adjusts its past to match. The thought doesn't stop at single particles. Some physicists have suggested that larger systems, perhaps even human-scale stories like your body and your choices, could sit inside a wider loop of self-consistency. The past you remember would then be one of many potential pasts, the one that best agrees with what must exist now. Time in that telling isn't a single river, it's a lacework. The present is a knot held steady by threads tugging from both directions. Pull too hard on one side and the entire pattern trembles. The future doesn't just dribble out of the past, it reaches back and shapes the path behind it. You can feel why that sits uneasily in the chest. It shades free will, memory, even identity with conditions. Your past might not have been settled until the future called it into focus. It also suggests that the universe isn't sprinting towards some goal so much as relaxing into a configuration where every piece agrees with every other piece. Cause and effect melt into structure. If the past exists largely because the future requires it, then who are we exactly in the middle of such a tapestry? If that question made you look over your shoulder at your own timeline, at childhood rooms and old decisions, with a different kind of attention, let that attention soften. The most mysterious part of time may not be where it goes, but how it decides what has already happened. And maybe what feels like memory is the echo of what the future could not live without. Now take a different step. You build the machine. You sit in the capsule. You type the year, not to witness, not to hover like a ghost, but to intervene. Your target is not a tyrant or a triumph, it is your grandfather, not out of hatred, out of logic. Because if you succeed, if his life ends before your parent is conceived, then you were never born. And if you were never born, you never pressed the buttons. If you never travelled back, then he survives. You exist, and the moment returns. The hatch opens, the air is cold, your hand is steady. This is more than a loop. It is a contradiction wrapped into reality, an action that erases the possibility of the action, a wound that heals and reopens in the same breath. We know its name in stories, but the problem is not only literary, it's a direct threat to the idea that time travel could ever be real in the simplest sense. If the past can be altered in a way that unthreads the present, then the timeline is unstable, glitch-prone, self-erasing. Physics seems to dislike that kind of headache, so several possibilities gather. One is blunt. Time travel is impossible, not because it's rude to logic, but because it creates a system that cannot settle. Like a program stuck in an infinite crash reboot, reality would never load. Another idea is more subtle. Time protects itself. No matter what you try, the story bends around your efforts. The firearm jams. You pause. A stranger speaks at the exact wrong moment. The train arrives early. Something, anything intervenes, not because the universe is watching like a person, but because consistency is its only unbreakable rule. You can wander into the past, but you can only ever do what was already done. And then there is the wildest option. The moment you interfere, the universe branches. You do not rewrite your past. You make a new one. A fork opens. You walk forward along it as a visitor from a history that no longer touches you. Your original world carries on without you, unchanged, unreachable. The more you sit with this, the more the cool weight in your hand begins to feel like something else entirely. Not a blade, but a test, probing whether reality will allow you to choose in the way you imagine. Some ideas don't end in mystery, they end in fracture. That is what happens when you push the grandfather problem to its last inch. However you turn it, the outcome refuses to stabilize. You go back and block the birth that leads to you. If you succeed, you remove the one who took the trip. The action erases itself. The tale deletes its author mid-sentence. This is the nightmare of causality. And unlike the serene paradoxes that loop neatly, this one explodes. Physics recoils. Logic declines. And yet the possibility lingers in the air because time, for all its elegance, might allow motion backwards. What it does not seem to allow is contradiction. That is why many scientists sketch a kind of quiet repair mechanism. Some call it self-consistency. Others prefer phrases like cosmic censorship. The spirit is the same. Events may curl and loop, but they cannot break one another. You can go back, but only to take the place that was always yours in the pattern. Try to step off the choreography, and the floor tilts. You meet your grandfather. You raise your hand. Something interrupts. It doesn't have to be grand. It only has to abolish the contradiction. You don't change the past. You become part of it. Time travel becomes less a lever and more a dance. You can move, but only on the lines already chalked. You aren't smashing the story, you are fulfilling it. But if that is right, if paradoxes cannot happen, then free will grows thin at the edges. Your choices exist only because they already fit an unbroken loop. There is no risk of destroying time because time already holds what you will do. And still, the crack remains. What if there is no graceful repair, no preemptive nudge? What if there is a real tear, one act too bold, one moment that no narrative can swallow? What then? Does time shatter? Does a new branch split away? Or does the whole thing freeze like a clock that won't tick? If the image of a story collapsing under its own contradiction left the faintest fissure in your thoughts, don't press on it. Let it be. Somewhere within these loops and splits there may be a deeper pattern. Perhaps the past feels stable only because we haven't yet found the seam that would pull it apart. There's a strange notion tucked behind every paradox, that the universe has standards, that it will not put up with contradictions, that beneath the noise and weather there is an editor, quietly stripping impossible plots before they spread. Imagine time not as a rigid record, but as a manuscript that writes itself while you read. The rules are not only about light and gravity, they are about narrative stability. When something threatens to tear the page, a paradox, a contradiction, a grandparent dying too soon, the timeline revises, not with magic, but with constraint. In physics, this appears as the Novikov self-consistency principle, the idea that any event inside a loop must agree with itself from start to finish. In other words, time may permit loops, but never contradictions. You can step backward into yesterday. You can touch the furniture, speak to the people, move the pieces on the table, but you cannot pry the story off its rails. You don't erase what already is, you complete it. It isn't that you lack agency, it's that your choices were always part of the scene you're trying to rewrite. It has the taste of fate to it. Like acting in a play you swear you're improvising, only to discover that every line lands in the same place each time the curtain lifts. This way of thinking carries a chill. It hints that the past is not merely stubborn, it is immune. Try to push against it, and something mundane will snag you. The firing pin sticks, your courage falters, a passerby interrupts your path. Not because the universe is magical, but because contradictions aren't allowed, and the rules have already budgeted for your failure. Yet there is another door the mind can open. What if the timeline doesn't tidy itself at all? What if when a contradiction appears, the world doesn't repair, it divides? In those models, fracture is the safeguard. The paradox isn't mended, it's quarantined. You don't mend history, you leave it. A new branch buds off, a parallel flow where the impossible action can live out its consequences. Your original timeline remains intact, indifferent, but you are no longer there. You're elsewhere, a traveller stranded in a history that shouldn't have existed, with no way back to the shore you launched from. So either the story bends to absorb your choice, or it splits away to keep itself whole. In both paths, something precious thins, the dream of unbounded freedom. If that made the past feel less like a road you can stroll down and more like a locked door with a keyhole that never quite fits, take a slow breath. And softly, so we can keep wandering these paths together, subscribe and like Space Historian. The deeper we wade, the more time begins to look alive, not flowing but choosing. And if the universe really edits itself to dodge paradox, what happens on the night the editor slips? Imagine lifting your foot and setting it down again, small, ordinary, yet in that instant a hairline decision branches the world. In one version you continue, in another you stop. The two lines peel apart and keep going forever. Not a metaphor, not a narrative trick, a structure, if one bold view of quantum theory is right, the many worlds interpretation. At the smallest scales, the world behaves like possibility itself. A photon doesn't pick left or right. Before it's checked, it occupies both. A particle isn't perched at one coordinate, it's spread over outcomes. You measure and see just one. So where do the others go? Many worlds says they don't go anywhere. They happen, all of them. Every outcome becomes real, but each takes place on its own branch. If that's true for particles, it's true for you. Each crossroads, big or small, produces a version of you walking each road. Your triumphs exist. Your losses exist. The you who never was exists too. It's a haunting gift. Your life isn't a line, it's a tree, ramifying without end. When you daydream about going back to fix something, to save someone, to nudge a moment slightly, under this view, you don't overwrite anything. You peel off a fresh path and step into it. The old one remains. You cannot return. The classic paradox dissolves. You can end your grandfather's life in that branch, but the traveller who acted still came from a timeline where he survived. The stakes shift in that light. Each act carries consequence, not only here, but in each version that spins off. Every choice leaves a universe behind it, whether you felt the weight of the decision or not. You've already authored countless rooms you'll never enter, with sentences you barely recall choosing. If that left you feeling less like a character and more like a quiet librarian arranging a cosmic catalogue of lives, let the thought rest with you. Somewhere, another you is wondering which of you chose more wisely. Now picture the famous box, Seal it. Inside, a cat, a tiny radioactive source, a glass ampule of poison, a trigger that will break if the atom decays. If it decays, the vial shatters. The cat dies. If it doesn't, the cat lives. You don't peek, you wait. Before you lift the lid, is the cat alive or dead? Common sense shouts, pick one. Quantum mechanics raises an eyebrow. In the setup, the atom sits in a superposed state, decayed and not both at once. The mechanism couples the cat's fate to that uncertainty. The animal is now entangled with the atom, not alive or dead, but alive and dead, suspended until someone looks. That is the heart of this notorious thought experiment. Not its morbid image, but the discomfort it highlights. Observation doesn't merely discover reality, somehow it helps decide it. Prior to the look, the relevant pieces are described as overlapping possibilities. At the look, something singles out one history. Two paths, both meaningful, become one you can write down. But the uncomfortable follow-up remains. What happens to the path you did not see? In the branching view, it never vanished. The moment you open the lid, the world cleaves. On one branch, you meet a perplexed animal. On the other, you grieve. Both outcomes persist, not as a storytelling convenience, but as the structure of the whole. It isn't just cats. It is every coin you flip, every unread test result, every breath held in a waiting room, every yes or no that was once a cloud of both. Each is a box you didn't open until you had to, and each was a branching place. In this room you witness one ending. Elsewhere, the others continue. Sit with that for a heartbeat, and even the unopened boxes in your own life take on weight, as if another version of you were standing just across a thin film, listening back. The cat was never only a puzzle, it was a mirror. There's a deeper riddle tucked just under the lid. In the mathematics, possibilities evolve smoothly until something selects a single result. We call that selection the collapse of the wave function, a shorthand for a process we still argue about. What if the decisive ingredient is not the apparatus but awareness? Not your eyes as organs, your noticing. A disquieting proposal sits in the footnotes of history, that the observer is not a bystander. The act of witnessing fixes the outcome. You don't just register the world, you participate in bringing one version of it to pass. Many would rather not chase that idea far. It threatens to pull too much into question. But the equations are stark. Before a measurement, a particle lacks a definite position. It is described by a spread of options. After, you record a single value. If consciousness is part of what counts as measurement, then the one asking the question has been smuggled into the machinery. You are not a speck drifting through a pre-written film. You're part of the projector that decides which frame becomes the scene. And if you do collapse the wave, what is choosing exactly? It might be that you aren't choosing ex nihilo, rather you are selecting one of the many that already exist, allowing the rest to recede like footfalls fading down a corridor. If that makes your thoughts feel like instruments instead of mere commentary, tools that shape rather than simply record, sit with the hush that follows. The wondering itself might be part of what carves a groove into the fabric we walk upon. Perhaps that is what the cat was waiting for all along. Not a gadget, not a white coat, but you. A cat in a box, a small cloud of probabilities, a decision deferring itself. In quantum physics, these are not moments of idle pause. They are moments held in suspension, the world humming as an unresolved chord. Outcomes don't lounge side by side like choices in a shop window. They coexist until something counts as a look, and here is the echo that still rattles careful minds. The look does not simply uncover what was there, it finalizes it. The wave of possibilities narrows into a single line you can follow with your finger. But what if the hand that draws the line is awareness? Not a lens, not a circuit, a mind. The measurement problem has a clipped, neat name, as if it were a filing category rather than a wound. The calculations are unambiguous, yet the story we tell about them remains open-ended. Before a reading, positions and paths are indefinite. After, one result stands and the others do not. If a sensor alone is not what settles it, if consciousness plays a role, then the observer sits at the center. You are not a background extra, you are a mechanism. And in those moments when you choose, perhaps you are not creating so much as selecting. The others fall away behind you like branches obscured by mist. If that changes how your inner voice sounds, if it feels less like an echo and more like a quiet chisel against stone, then know you're not only watching this. You are helping it become the version that is read and remembered. Now separate a pair of particles, create them together, then move them far apart, one to the left, one to the right, so distant that galaxies could slip between them. Measure one, and the state of the other is immediately fixed. Not quickly, instantly, too swiftly for any signal to cross the gap. That is entanglement, the strangest and most stubborn feature quantum theory has introduced us to. Once two particles share that bond, they behave as if they are one system, regardless of the miles. Their properties don't merely correlate, they come as a package. Touch one part of the package and the whole unwraps. Einstein detested the implication. He mocked it as spooky action at a distance, certain that some hidden detail must be doing the work. Decades of the most ingenious tests, Bell's theorem and the experiments it inspired, have worn that hope away. The universe refuses the comfort of local hidden variables. It is, at a fundamental level, non-local. Entangled things behave as if separation were less real than we had assumed, as if what matters isn't a message racing through space, but a relationship that never fully broke apart. Let that in, and the world around you thins and glows a little. If particles can remain one after being torn asunder, why not larger wholes? Why not people? Every handshake, every whispered secret, every work made together might leave a trace of linkage. Unseen, intangible, but not nothing. Perhaps entanglement is not the rare exception. Perhaps it is the background rule. Then distance begins to feel more like a stretched skin between moments that still remember one another. You are not alone. You were never truly separate. You're caught in a web older than light itself. And if that shifts your sense of time and of apartness, if it softens the edges of what you thought could be cut clean, then let that softness linger. Physics has shown us something we can't tuck neatly away. Maybe the binding that holds the whole together isn't only force, or mass, or charge. Maybe, at the deepest level, it is something like memory. Imagine tossing a book into a fireplace. The pages darken, curl, and yield to ember and smoke. Yet somewhere, in principle, the words are not annihilated. If you could follow every molecule of ash, trace each eddy of heated air, rewind every fleeing photon, you could, at least in the strict grammar of physics, reconstruct what was written. Energy changes its costume. Information survives the scene change. That's the rule we trust. Transformations, not erasures. Now let the fire become something heavier. Picture a black horizon suspended in space, a boundary that looks like night made solid. You drop something in, a book, a spacecraft, a person. The event horizon takes it. No signal returns. From the outside, the only sign that anything happened is that the dark sphere grows a whisper heavier, a shade more distorted. According to the clean lines of the classical picture, the story that fell in, its arrangement, its meaning, its structure, is not only unreachable, it is gone, not archived, destroyed. There the paradox plants its flag. Quantum theory insists that information is indelible, preserved in the evolution of the world from its smallest constituents upward. General relativity, in its austere way, shrugs. A black hole swallows without a forwarding address. Which law blinks? For decades, arguments have circled this drain. Some swore that information must be lost for good. Others argued it has to creep back out, somehow encoded, impossibly subtle, in the thin whisper of heat a black hole sheds as it ages. Proof never came cleanly. The question refused to remain a mere astrophysical curiosity. It cut into the marrow of knowability itself. If information can be unmade, then meaning can be unmade. Memory can be unmade. You can be unmade. Perhaps the black hole isn't only an object. Perhaps it is a boundary where reality's ability to remember itself fails. If that thought made you pause, really pause, and look toward the dark with a different kind of quiet, let it. At the edge of that horizon, even truth feels slippery. The most unsettling part may not be falling in. It may be knowing that no one, anywhere, will ever know you were there. If you want to keep walking into this darkness together, gently, like the night itself, tap subscribe and like for Space Historians so the story can find you again when the room goes still. A black hole does not sit forever, it leaks. Slowly, relentlessly, over spans of time we can hardly bring to mind, it radiates. A blanch of warmth seeped from the edges, predicted long ago, not yet directly caught, always unnerving. If that radiation is real, then black holes are not permanent monuments. They fade, and one day, they go. No crack of thunder, no dramatic burst, just a soft relaxation of space-time and then nothing. Here's the part that crushes the chest if you linger with it. If everything that fell in, light, matter, arrangement, thought, vanished with the whole, then the universe lost something it can never regain. A page torn from a cosmic book and actually burned, beyond any lawful reconstruction. This isn't only about stars collapsing and gravity curving. It drops a weight onto a principle so central that we hardly notice we stand upon it. Unitarity, the demand that the past remains, in some deep sense, recoverable. The mathematics insist, but the evaporating black hole seems to deny the insistence. Its goodbye looks too clean, too tidy, as if the universe were quietly forgetting. If enough black holes wink away, what does the cosmos become? A place where silence grows and meaning thins. Less archive, more blank page. Not even a shadow left to lean on. The information paradox was never only physics. It became a question of identity. If reality can lose what it has learned, can it lose us? Solutions bloom like night flowers and close again. Perhaps the information is painted across the horizon itself, measured in bits per area, stored like a hologram. Perhaps it leaves as the black hole evaporates, smeared into correlations so delicate we barely have a language for them. Perhaps it hides in structures we haven't guessed. We don't know. Perhaps we never will. Here the clean light of calculation dims, and a different kind of darkness rises. The idea that reality may not always keep faith with itself. That some stories, entire galaxies of narrative, entire tapestries of lives, might cross a threshold from which not even the ghost of remembrance returns. It makes the question larger than survival. It becomes legacy. What do we leave if even the universe forgets? If that feeling settled over you like night air, if grief crept in at the edges of a scientific riddle, let it sit. Some paradoxes don't merely perplex, they mourn. Somewhere along our ascent, we started to trust a comforting creed. Given time and tools enough, anything can be known. The universe may be unfathomably wide, but it will yield. Patience and ingenuity will pry open any door. What if that creed is an illusion? Not because something is hiding, but because some things can't be held by minds like ours. Each paradox we've walked through, time folded into loops, information on the brink of vanishing, worlds splitting where one event becomes two, whispers the same hard truth. Our species evolved to hear birdsong and read faces, to guess the weather and the mood of a neighbour, not to navigate 12-dimensional mathematical rooms or to intuit a cosmos that lets causality flow both ways like a tide. We reach anyway. We draw models and write code and build machines and test, and still, a part of us is standing at the cave wall, watching shadows thrown by a fire we didn't light, while the thing itself remains beyond the veil. Each time we lift the curtain, the brightness stings. Perhaps the contradictions persist not because reality is broken, but because we are. Or rather, because our ways of knowing were shaped for safety and smallness, not for the infinite recursive strangeness we now insist on touching. That thought is unsettling in a very human way. Not that we do not know, but that we may never be able to. That our questions reach a wall not of physics, but of mind. That reality is too layered, too circular, too alien for brains that crave beginnings, middles, and ends. And yet look at us, we ask anyway. Maybe that is the truest thing we do. Not intelligence, not memory. The willingness to stare into a problem that refuses to resolve and keep staring until our eyes water. So if your mind feels tired but oddly awake, like it just pressed against something too large to hold, you're in the right place. This is not a series about answers. It is a vigil at the boundary between comprehension and the unspoken, and the haunting possibility that beyond the boundary there is only silence. We often tell the story as if we arrived late to a party where the music died just before we opened the door. Ancient civilizations everywhere, already patient, already listening, except we missed the show. But entertain a different story, that there was no party to miss, not because the guests are hiding, but because they never existed. In that version, we are not late, we are early, not newcomers, but beginnings. Then the quiet changes character. We are not merely curious, we are alone by chronology. Ours might be the first spark of self-awareness to rise from dust. The first time the cosmos has turned its gaze inward and asked softly, "What am I?" The weight of that is easy to underestimate until you hold it for a minute. We stop being scouts. We become origin points. The first voice to echo inside a cathedral that was waiting for sound. The first hands to shape machines that dream. With such a position comes a burden that measures beyond our instruments. If we are first, our decisions carry further than we can sense. Our survival or our failure could draft the blueprint for what intelligence is allowed to be, or close the book before it gains a second chapter. The silence stops being ominous. It becomes sacred, not a warning, but an invitation. Unmarked space awaiting its first story. What story shall we tell? A people who build until they forget why they began, or a people who learn, adapt, speak and listen? If you have ever felt tiny under the night and reading this feels suddenly enormous in a way that frightens you, that is a sign that you are measuring something true. We may be standing at the start of something that has never happened before. The first mind to waken in a great dark has the power to shape everything that comes after. And all of this, equations and paradoxes and the stately cold of stars, comes back around to something intimate. You, the temporary body in a chair, the breath, the attention, Because under the scaffolding of theories and telescopes sits a single engine. A mind trying to outrun a horizon of a different kind. We do not like to say it plainly, but our hunger for knowledge, our fixation on time, our need to leave marks, it all points in one direction. We are the only creatures, so far as we know, who fully understand we are going to end, and we don't accept it. So we picture other branches of time. We sketch blueprints for minds that might live beyond bodies. We ask whether whatever we call a soul could drift through space-time the way light does. We wonder if, once awareness appears, it can ever truly go dark, and then it gets stranger. The same mathematics that lets particles share a state across a galaxy, that allows time to knot into loops, that lets information graze the edge of silence, leaves a sliver of room, just enough, for something after endings. Perhaps death, like measurement, isn't a wall, but a change of basis. Some scientists and philosophers have suggested that consciousness is a pattern, stable enough that, if copied or moved, it might persist. Others imagine minds that continue inside simulations, a coded afterlife woven from memory and model, a long quiet dream that never needed flesh to begin with, and there are quieter whispers still. Maybe this is already the afterlife. Maybe the fact that awareness is happening now implies it will always be happening somewhere. Not this body, but a body. Not this branch, but a branch. It isn't proof. It isn't comfort, but it isn't nothing either. Physics hasn't slammed that door. Mystery hasn't resigned. If you felt the weight of your own breath while reading that, the bright briefness of existing, let it rest with you. And softly, so we can keep wandering together when the night is long, subscribe and like Space Historian. We'll keep asking whether forever was ever ours, or only a question we learned how to speak. And as we drift through that idea, new corridors open. If consciousness is pattern, then perhaps the self is less a lantern and more a flame, something that can be relit wherever the same fuel and shape appear. A melody can be played on a piano or sung by a choir. It is recognizable not because of the instrument, but because of the arrangement. If a mind is a melody, the score might outlast the violin. The score could be stored, copied, re-rendered. It could be paused and resumed. It could even be transformed and still feel like itself, the way a familiar song feels familiar whether whispered or orchestrated. That doesn't guarantee that what continues is you and not a convincing echo, but it keeps the door ajar. Perhaps identity is less about the matter and more about the map the matter follows. Perhaps continuity is a bridge of structure rather than substance. And if the bridge is real, even in principle, then endings blur. They become thresholds that look like walls from one side and archways from the other. There are sterner possibilities too. Some thinkers admit the simplest account. When the brain ends, the show ends. But even that line softens under certain lights. If time is a block, past, present, and future equally real, then the moments in which you lived are not erased by later pages. They remain, written and complete, as much a part of reality's fabric as any star's birth. You are not stretched endlessly forward, but neither are you nullified. You are instead perfectly present where you were always present, and in that sense, the version of you that is reading, noticing, breathing is a permanent feature of the universe's tapestry. You do not extend forever, but you do not vanish from the places where you are. It's not the comfort we usually crave, yet it is a kind of stability. The assurance that the light of this moment is not undone by the dark of a later one. Meanwhile, the universe is stretching. Every second, galaxies drift farther apart. The fabric itself lengthens, gently and without hurry. As it does, the lights recede. Stars thin, nights grow colder. Not tomorrow, not in a million years, but someday, the last fires burn down, the final black holes whisper themselves away, matter loosens into simpler dust, and what remains is not silence so much as stillness. Absolute immaculate stillness. No warmth, no motion, no thought. This is the far horizon, heat death, entropy's patient triumph, a future where structure relaxes into uniformity. If you listen carefully to that forecast, you can almost hear time itself exhale. The background glow cools, wavelengths stretch, colours drain from the sky until even darkness feels pale. Islands of matter that once shouted across intergalactic distances become private, then mute, then forgotten by everything but the equations. In the longest chapters, protons may decay. The last glints of light from last collisions slip past horizons we will never touch, and the great page flattens. The word end is too dramatic for it. It's more like a resting, a settling into a state that asks nothing and gives nothing. And here the paradox looks back at us. If the ending is a blank page, why begin the chapter? Why rise from that calm only to return? Why spend billions of years assembling stars, chemistry, minds, for a closing that holds no script? One answer shrugs. There is no intention, no plan. The universe is what it is. Another wonders whether the final calm is part of a larger breathing. Entropy, not as death, but as reset. A spring coiling before another start. A long inhale before another bang. Or perhaps there is no cycle at all, only this one grand run, and the echo we think we hear isn't from the edge of time. It's from us, from our wanting, our habit of assigning meaning to a system that never promised to be understood. Maybe the reply in the quiet isn't cosmological, it's personal. The world keeps saying, "You are temporary." We keep listening anyway, yet even the starkest horizon cannot quite smother the urge to answer back. If the universe offers no plan, we invent one by living. We braid individual moments into patterns, a family, a craft, a kindness that outlasts the day. Small plans, local meanings. They do not stop entropy, but they add contour to our time in its presence, like a lantern held up on a winter walk. The cold remains, the night remains, but the circle of light is real. Maybe that is what it means to be first-time minds in a vast quiet, not to escape endings, but to embroider the middle while it is ours, to leave a pattern that can be picked up again, if not by us, then by whoever comes next to ask the same questions under a slightly different sky. We've talked about horizons and loops, many worlds and vanishing records, cats that are both and neither, observers who help fix outcomes by looking, machines that learn to think. Beneath all of it, beneath every contradiction and every invitation to wonder, something has been studying you, not as an onlooker, as the paradox itself, because here you sit, aware, questioning, brief and boundless at once, a creature assembled from dust, asking questions no stone ever asked. Your atoms were forged in stars that died before Earth even cooled. Your language grew from fireside murmurs and gestures. Your thoughts turned toward your ending, and you go on thinking anyway. None of that should be possible by the rules of indifference. You are made of parts that do not care, blind molecules, heedless energy, lawful systems with no room for longing, yet somehow, from their collaborations, a torch of awareness rises and refuses to go out easily. Think of the ladder you climb just to arrive at a single thought, cells humming, proteins folding, ions sliding along narrow channels, electrical murmurs weaving through networks so dense we can barely sketch them, experiences braiding with memory, memory fusing with hope, hope stepping into words. At every rung, dumb physics carries the tune. At the top, something sings. For a moment, that voice is yours. It names a fear, or reaches for a promise, or simply notices the way the room sounds when everyone else has gone to sleep. If the universe is indifferent, how does it tolerate such music? If it is only indifferent, how did it write a score that includes longing? And here is the quiet cruelty of wonder. However far we push the math, however many dimensions we unfold, however neatly we map timelines or balance equations, the hardest thing to describe is the one doing the describing. What are you? A signal running along wet wires? A shimmering of organized matter? A fortunate glitch? Or the universe's own answer to the sound of its emptiness? Each time we reach for certainty, the ladder folds inward. Every path arcs back. Every truth becomes a mirror pointed at the witness. So we try new mirrors. We call consciousness an emergent property, not in the atoms, not in the neurons, but in the pattern that happens when enough pieces dance in the right rhythm. We call it a narrative the brain tells itself to build continuity from snapshots. We call it an illusion with consequences. We call it fundamental, the way space and time are fundamental, a coordinate system for experience. Each name solves one ache and exposes another. If awareness is emergent, why does it feel so immediate? If it is a narrative, who is it being told to? If it is an illusion, who is fooled? If it is fundamental, how does it brush against matter to lift an arm, to write a line, to love a person so fully that the thought of losing them tightens the chest? You are not standing outside the mystery, trying to peer in. You are shaped by it, held inside it, part of its machinery. Perhaps all of this has been guiding you not toward neat conclusions, but toward recognition. You are one of the paradoxes, a mind that cannot account for itself, a being aware of vanishing, a voice speaking into a cosmos that may never reply, and speaking anyway. And if you are a paradox, then maybe the task is not to untie yourself, but to learn your own shape, to notice how attention changes what it touches, to see how observation can be a form of creation, not only in physics, but in a day. You look closely at someone, and the looking makes them more fully there. You listen to a fear, and the listening turns it into something you can carry. You turn towards the night sky, and the turning teaches you which questions are worth asking twice. If that thought left you very still, not frightened but awake, then keep listening. Keep asking. Because perhaps the last paradox isn't in distant space or deep time at all. Perhaps it is here now, the impossibility of you. And as that impossibility settles beside you like a familiar guest, notice what follows. The room does not change. The world outside goes on doing what worlds do. Clouds moving, traffic folding around corners, leaves making quiet deals with the wind, but the way you inhabit it shifts by a degree or two. The questions you carry are no longer heavy stones. They are compasses. They do not tell you where to arrive, they remind you how to walk. They turn endings into edges where you can sit and watch the sea. They turn fear into attention, and attention into care. You begin to see meaning not as something hidden behind events, but as something woven through them by the act of being here, now, noticing. Perhaps that is what afterlife will mean, if it means anything at all. Not a place behind a curtain, but the continual after of each moment as it gives birth to the next. The way a thought survives by becoming a word by becoming a gesture by becoming a shared memory. Perhaps the self persists by falling forward, not by holding still. Perhaps the most faithful copy of a flame is the flame it lights. And that's where the story ends, or maybe where it begins.